Oops, no what? Perfect. We're recording now. Okay. What I want to do is I'm just going to recap not everything, but the main concepts of the Mishnah and that, simply because we're continuing the Gemora's discussion on this Mishnah. So we do need to, just to recap the Mishnah. It also helps if anybody wasn't here in that, but not every single detail. But what we'll do, we'll just recap enough so that everybody has the flow and the thread. Because I don't recall, who was here last week? Which of us? Me. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So with regard to the Mishnah, just a recap on the Mishnah. The Mishnah was talking about the concept of planting underneath an Asherah tree. And the specific issue, the challenge, was with regard to benefiting from the tree. You're not benefiting from the tree directly because you're not planting or using anything on the tree. Like, let's say some kinds of plants hang on a tree or utilize the tree itself. So we're not talking about utilizing the Asherah tree itself, but we're talking about planting underneath it, which might yield certain benefits. Might yield benefits. You also wanted to mention Yotzad. Michael's.
Yeah, I've got Yotzad, my mom.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
that's right. Chet Shvat.
Yeah.
It's Shvat. Okay, so Tamar Bat Yaakov Eliezer. So Les, that's your mom we're just talking about over here. Yeah. L'chaim for that. Yeah. So there are various ways that this person who plants, let's say, a vegetable patch under a tree can benefit. The tree provides shade, protection from heat. The shade can also be a problem. It can sometimes a plant needs sunlight and other nutrients of light, and it can be a problem. There's also the foliage. That's the leaves that fall down and become compost on top of these vegetables. And based on this, the Tana, the author of the Mishnah, who's also, believe it or not, known as the rabbis or Chazal, so he separates it as a seasonal thing. He says that you can plant vegetables under the Asherah tree in winter, but not in summer, because in winter there isn't really a benefit by planting under the tree. But in summer there is a benefit because the tree is going to protect. With shade, it's going to protect your vegetables. In the middle of the Mishnah was a side note to say that there's certain kinds of vegetables that it doesn't matter which season, they're always going to benefit from being under a tree. And then the Mishnah concluded with a dissenting opinion, Rabbi Yossi's opinion, which was that you cannot plant vegetables in winter or your Moisak Shamim or rain season either. And his reason was that especially in the rain season, what happens is the foliage or the composting leaves drop down and benefit the vegetables that are growing below. That was basically the argument, the debate from an Asherah tree. Is it seasonal or not seasonal? And then after, and just to explain what it is, and that's, I just wanted to, how do you call it, to extract so that we can all understand the main formulas here and the main ideas. It doesn't matter if it's not every single technicality, but the main ideas. And the Gemora said that there's a concept called Zevezegoyrem. And what this is what happens if something comes from more than one source. In other words, there are more than one contributing factor in the same thing. So for instance, thanks to Yossi, we've got beautiful food, but there's different ingredients. There's dough, and there's spinach, and there's ginger, and there's honey, and there's sugar, and there's cinnamon. There's different ingredients and things that contribute to make something. Now, what happens, not with regard to your things, but if something comes, and on one side, it's from mutar, from permissible, and on the other side, it's from asur. In other words, what happens if this fellow plants his vegetables under a tree, and yes, the Asherah tree contributes to the vegetables growing nicely, either by giving them shade or by giving them leaves that turn into compost. But then there's also nutrients in the soil below that also contribute. So in other words, there's more than one contributing factor that contributes simultaneously to something happening. What do we go by? This causes it to grow nicely. That causes it to grow nicely. What do we go by? And that in itself is another machlokes, another argument in the Talmud, where the sages approach this idea. Is gorem mutar? In other words, do we say that as long as one of the contributing factors is okay, it's okay? Or do we say it's prohibited? And this is what the Gemora was doing. It was trying to figure out, is that why Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanon are having their argument? Is their argument about how you weigh up whether the tree and the ground are contributing towards this particular vegetable patch growing nicely or not? In the words of the Gemora, L'meimra de Rabbi Yossi Savar Zeva Zegoyrev Asur. Are we assuming that Rabbi Yossi says that when there's more than one contributing factor prohibited, and the rabbis say it's not? And then the Gemara launched itself into a discussion. I didn't go into every single detail to say, well, you can play around a bit. You can say that these cases are different. The other case that we spoke about, which was mentioned, that there was a case where a person has to destroy an idol, a matter of idol worship, and Rabbi Yossi said it can be ground up and thrown into the sea. And then we were still concerned because grindings also have a certain nutritional power, a certain contributing factor. They land on things and contribute to them. You know, minerals, if you grind up minerals and the minerals fall down on the soil, it can provide nutrients. Everything in the world that lives survives also on iron and copper and various types of earth. So why would Rabbi Yossi allow somebody to grind something that is a davar shel avodah zarah, a matter of avodah zarah, and spritz it all over the place? And the Gemara answered and said that we can explain it away. How do we explain it away? The Gemara said at the time that we can say that when it comes to idols, he's more concerned. He's less concerned. Other way around, when it comes to idols, he's less concerned because it's getting completely chopped. I don't know if ever you guys saw how they grind something in a recycling plant. They can put even a whole car through a big machine, and it just swallows up the whole thing, and there's like nothing left. But shavings, but pieces, there's like really nothing left. So the Gemara tried to answer that according to Rabbi Yossi, if you're talking about avodah zarah and idol, that the whole Matzias, its whole essential being, is getting ground up and messed up and completely is just absolutely being pulverized. So anybody that walks past wouldn't be able to see anything of what it originally was. So he goes a bit lighter on that. He says, matter, it's okay because it's anyways being destroyed. Now, in the Gemara itself, there's actually a little bit of a debate between Rashi and Tosfos, commentators on the Gemara, as to exactly what ka'azel le'ibud means, totally destroyed. One of them, I think it's Tosfos, says that the issue is that when it's such fine dust, not too much can land in one place. It's going to be so separated that there's no metzias, there's nothing anymore. Whereas when it comes to the tree, the leaves generally fall together. You normally have a pile of leaves under the tree. It's an Asherah tree, it's an Avodah Zarah tree, and you're still seeing a significant thing that emanates from the tree together. You're seeing a pile of leaves. You know, the gardener rakes the leaves into the corner and they compost together. It's a proper entity. And that's why he said, Osur. And that's pretty much where we got up to. Then the Gemara came out with another novel idea. And it said to us that what we have to do when you consider a vegetable patch benefiting from the, how would you call it, the nutrients of the leaves that fall down from the tree, what you have to do is weigh up what we call the net effect. What's the bottom line? The accountants can tell us what that means. What is the net result? You might have positives on this side, negatives on that side, or liabilities on this side, and credits or assets on that side. And what you have to do is take the one versus the other and figure out what's your bottom line. What does that mean? The Gemora went and discovered a principle. We touched on it as well, that we said that if an animal was consecrated to the temple treasury and became disqualified, they had to sell it and donate the proceeds to the temple treasury. And the animal was sold. In other words, somebody would have a value in buying a carcass of an animal. You know, there's a value to a carcass, either the meat or the hide or whatever it is that one's going to use. And there was a discussion in that place where it talks about selling that carcass. You know, skins were a very big commodity in the old days, the hides of the animals.
No, they still are big commodity.
In fact, there's actually a crowd that sells them in the street down the road from me. You can buy a whole, yeah. You say it's still a big commodity in animal hide. Sorry? The leather industry. So what it discusses over here, it's interesting, in leather industry is that there's actually two ways to skin the hide off an animal. And the reason we're going into this is to understand this principle. It's the principle of net effect or net result, but we're extracting the principle from this particular example. And the example that's given in that particular area of halacha, which comes from Rav Mari, son of Rav Kana, is that there's two ways to take the hide off the animal. One way of taking the hide off the animal, they make small incisions across the width of the animal at the top, and then they pull back the leather or the hide. But what happens is, because of the way it's done, your hide is not complete. You get pieces of the animal hide. The other way to do it is that you want to keep the completeness of the animal hide. You know, like some people have those rugs with the head of the leopard or whatever at the end of the rug. They've managed to get the skin off complete, off the whole animal. And that is a much more sophisticated process, where they start already to make the incisions in the legs of the animal so that they're able to take the skin off without affecting the skin, or minimally affecting the skin. You know, they almost get the entire skin off in one piece. When they do that, there's two effects, and you're gonna find out why this is important. You might be wondering, why are we doing a lesson on how to, it's called on tanning, on the tanning industry. The reason for this is that when you take the skin off complete, the value of the skin in the marketplace is much higher. You have enhanced the value of the skin. You're going to fetch a better price for the skin in the marketplace by taking it off complete. If you take it off in pieces, you're going to get a lower value for the skin. However, when you take the skin off whole, you mess up the flesh much more. You basically destroy the flesh of the animal in a certain kind of way. Your cuts or whatever are not the same. So you increase the value of the hide, you decrease the value of the skin. Now, because you're working with kosher, with consecrated items, the halacha says over there that you're not allowed to do this. And the reason why you're not allowed to do this,
because hektish, no?
Sorry?
This was the animal that was sold.
An animal that was consecrated, it became hektish. It became hektish, and you're not allowed to lower its value. But the issue is that although you're gaining by increasing the value of the hide, you are losing by decreasing the value of the flesh. In other words, the idea is that you're not gaining by increasing the value of the hide. You might want it. Maybe you're more into hides than flesh. But what's happening over here is by increasing the value of the hide, you're decreasing the value of the flesh. The result is actually no net gain. If anything, a net loss. There's no gain in increasing the value of the hide, and therefore it's not allowed. In other words, the way halacha works is it says you can't ring fence the process that is done to the hide versus the process that is done to the meat, to the flesh. You have to take into consideration both of them. And if you find out that although you're increasing the value of the hide, you are decreasing the value of the flesh, you are therefore not increasing anything, you are damaging, and damaging is not allowed with a consecrated animal. So this was a principle that was introduced by Rav Mari bar Rav Kahana. And what this Gemara wants to extract from there is sometimes you have to look at everything and figure out what is your net result, not figure out whether one action is enhancing or decreasing the value. So therefore, based on that, the Gemara wants to say we can say the same thing over here, that if you have, according to one of these opinions, if you have got your vegetables growing under an Asherah tree, and you're worrying that the foliage of the Asherah tree is going to enhance your crops, it's going to benefit from it. What you benefit from the foliage, you're losing out from the shade. The shade is blocking the nutrition of the sun, or maybe other things. So what you gain from the Neviah, from the foliage, you're losing from the shade. Neviah, it's a expression here for the fallings, the things that fall down from the tree. Sorry? What do you call it? Shalachim. Shalechet. When the leaves fall down, the autumn time. So basically, the shalechet is good for the crops, but the shade isn't. So in other words, it's a sideways transaction. There's no gain. Because there's no gain, you're actually protected from the Issur Hana, from the prohibition of benefits. You are not allowed to benefit from the Asherah tree. The bottom line is you're not benefiting from it. It's a contra effect. Yeah. One contras the other in accounting language. Yeah. Sorry?
Gains and rebounds.
Yeah. So then the Gemara, and this is actually exactly where we got up to. So the Gemara continues on its journey to try and figure out whether Rabbi Yossi holds Zeva Ze Goyrem Asur. Is Rabbi Yossi of the opinion that when there's two contributing factors to something, we pronounce Asur? In other words, we say that because of the fact that there is a positive and a negative, we don't want to allow the use of it. In other words, it is the, how would you call it? The foliage of the tree, or some benefit from the Asherah tree, but there's also the nutrients in the ground. That also doesn't help. If some of the contribution is Avodah Zarah, and some of the contribution is okay, we're assuming that Rabbi Yossi would say awesome. But the Gemara wants to check his opinion out, to test his opinion in other circumstances. And this I'm going to read inside. Says the Gemara, V'sava Rabbi Yossi zeva ze goyrem asur. Are you saying that Rabbi Yossi holds that when both this and that cause it, it's prohibited? When both permitted and forbidden items contribute to a net result, it's prohibited? V'hatanya, we learned in a brayser, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi taught, Noitin yichur shel orla, you're allowed to plant a shoot from an orla tree. That's a tree that hasn't yet achieved 3 years of growth. V'anoitin egois shel orla, but a nut or a fruit from the orla tree may not be planted. Mipnei shehu peri, because it's a fruit. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, but Rav Yehuda Amar Rav said, Moide Rabbi Yossi, he admits, that if he did plant and he did graft or he did cast a shoot into the ground, mutter, then it would be permissible. What is the context over here? The context is we're talking about a tree that is considered to be orla. It's not 3 years old. Orla is the law that when a tree is planted, we have to wait 3 years before we're allowed to use it. And before 3 years, it's called orla. However, what is the Issur of Orla to benefit from specifically? The fruit on the tree. To benefit from other parts of the tree is not necessarily prohibited as Orla. So this person comes along, and we're being told that, first of all, if he manages to graft another tree from that tree, that's for sure not a problem. Because a shoot or a branch or any other method of grafting a second additional tree is not benefiting from the fruit of the tree. He shouldn't plant a nut or a seed which comes from an actual fruit, because that's, you're not supposed to benefit from the fruits. Lechatchila as a first option, but if he did, even that is not going to make it prohibited, because when the Torah said do not benefit, it meant directly, don't pick the fruit off the tree and eat it. Don't pick the nuts, crack the shell and eat it. But if he went along and turned that into another tree, that tree would be okay. But Tanya Nama Hache.
Most trees are dropping fruit and it grows
Yeah,
a new
yeah.
tree, we're okay with it.
Yeah.
But you leave that new tree for another
Yeah,
3 years.
yeah, but after the 3 years, no one can say that tree's prohibited forever because it originally came from an orla tree, which was a prohibited item. But Tanya Namahachen, we learned likewise, Maida Rabbi Yossi, Shim not of a hirich v'hirkiv mutar. That Rabbi Yossi admits that if a person planted a nut or a fruit from an orla tree or grafted a shoot in order to make another tree, it's permissible. So what do we see? That Rabbi Yossi seems to say that even though you've got a mixture here, you know what your mixture is? That when you planted this fruit from the orla tree, or this branch, it's not only the tree and the fruit, it's the ground. The nutrients in the ground, which are neutral nutrients, the words rhyme, they follow on with each other. The neutral nutrients in the ground have also contributed to this branch or fruit preparing a new tree. So you've got a mixture, it's called Zeva Zegorem. You've got the tree, which you shouldn't have really touched. That was something prohibited. And the ground, which is okay. The two come together, form a new tree, and Rabbi Yossi says it's okay. So we're trying to extrapolate that then his opinion must be that as long as you have a mixture where this side is contributing to the new tree and that side is contributing to the new tree, it's okay, as long as one part of the partnership is okay. So then the Gemora says, maybe in our exploration here, maybe Rabbi Yossi differentiates between other prohibitions and Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah, we know, idolatry is a particularly rough prohibition. You know, you must, after all, it's one of the cardinal sins, Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah, Gilei Arayos, and Shvich Shtachim. I mean, it's literally challenging the sovereignty of the Almighty Himself. So maybe the concept is that when it comes to Avodah Zarah, Rabbi Yossi is much stricter. And Asherah tree is Avodah Zarah. But if you're talking about Orla is an agricultural law that the Torah says, don't use the fruit of an Orla. But if you already did, don't use the branch of an Orla to plant another tree. But if you already did, maybe that's not as heavyweight, stringent an issue as Avodah Zarah. Maybe you want to say, maybe Rabbi Yossi differentiates between other sorts of prohibitions and Avodah Zarah. And since when does he differentiate? We challenge that. Vatanya, we learned in a brisa. The Gemora quotes a brisa with a practical example. Sadesh and his dablo bezevel Avodah Zarah v'chin para shenis pakmo b'charshina Avodah Zarah. There's a brisa which says, talk about a field that became composted with compost that was Avodah Zarah. You know, there was animals that were used for Avodah Zarah, and they did what animals do, and somebody collected up their dung and turned it into compost. It's compost from an Avodah Zarah animal, and he used it to compost his field. Or maybe he took cows that went and were fattened, or they ate vetches. It's a type of growth that was from Avodah Zarah. Somebody went to a place where the growth belonged to the Avodah Zarah, it belonged to the local church or whatever it was, and he went to that hedge and he clipped it all and fed it to his cows. So what do you do with the cows? You've now fattened them with legumes that come from Avodah Zarah. Tana Chada, one opinion was, what do you do now? You've taken your field and you've composted it with dung that comes from animals that were Avodah Zarah. You've taken your cow and you've caused him to eat food, legumes, some kind of, it's a type of a legume that animals eat, that belong to Avodah Zarah. So you've got two opinions here. Tana Chada, one Tana says, don't worry, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. Because at the end of the day, it's not the whole animal and it's not the everything. Sadeh, Tizara, the field, you can plant anyway. There's many other contributing factors to a field being successful besides that particular layer of dung. So Sadeh, Tizara, you can sow your field. Para Tishachet, you can shech that animal and have a nice steak. It's okay. But Tanya Idach, and there was another opinion that says, no, you got a problem. You've now composted your field with Avodah Zarah dung. You've now fattened your animal with Avodah Zarah legumes, vetches. Now you've got a problem. And therefore, what you have to do, you actually have to sod it tavoir, leave your field to lie fallow, you know, like they do in Shmir. You got to walk away from your field until you're sure that whatever effect that had is finished. So for instance, you can bring an agricultural expert and he can say to you that from that dung, your field's got X level of nutrients. Until those nutrients depart, you leave the field alone for 6 months, a year, whatever it is. And until you know that that benefit is gone, you can't use your field. And the same thing with the animal. You've got to leave that animal alone. And until the animal loses a bit of weight, literally, it says, tirze, it's got to become a little bit like Pare's cows. It's got to lose the thin seven. It's got to move from the fat seven to the thin seven. It's got to swallow itself. So until that cow loses a bit of weight, so that you are not benefiting. So in other words, you take your cow to Weight Watchers, and if they tell you that your cow is now, I don't know the weights, 950 kilos, and he got fattened by 100 kilos eating avodah zarah, he's got to go on diet until he's 850 kilos.
But the animal,
But he's done damage to his shoulder.
Yeah.
Can't give you milk.
but the animal that's done, it's related to
the cow eat new food and go and new manure. So
But maybe
it's
he
not-
was-
it's not,
no.
the food is not from Avodah Zarah.
He's saying that this animal was eating that stuff for a while, and you've now benefited from it. You have to be able to get rid of that benefit. If it's 24 hours, then you're wonderful. I mean, you've got to find out from a breeder. He's going to tell you, let's say your neighbor had avodah zarah there and you let your cow pasture there, I don't know for how many days, weeks or months. And he clearly went from, I don't know what, a 10,000 Rand animal to a 20,000 Rand animal. You got to wait until he's back at 10.
but also
Very
the
good.
animals that are
Very
avodah
good.
zarah, it's
Yeah.
only that animal, not the range.
Yeah, no, that's this
I mean,
particular.
one cow is not going to
This
the whole
particular-
field. So how do you?
Animal, you should
Yeah.
carefully-
So the Gemora wants to know who is arguing over here. Who are the people arguing over whether or not you can use this animal? My love, Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan. Is this perhaps Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan from our Mishnah? Maybe it's the same team having the same arguments in a different context. The same people in our Mishnah who said that we worry about the vegetables underneath the Asherah tree in winter, or we don't worry about the vegetables under the Asherah tree in winter. The Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi could perhaps be the same two opinion who say we worry about the cow that ate somebody else's avodah zarah beans, or we don't worry about the cow that ate someone else's avodah zarah. Maybe this argument is the same as that argument. That's a general mechanism in Gemora where we try to figure it out. And the Gemora says, no, you got it wrong. This is not Rabbi Yossi and Rabbanan. This is another argument that was between the rabbis and Rabbi Eliezer. Leave Rabbi Yossi alone. Lo no, Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbanan. This is another machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan. Another two Jews were arguing about other matters, and this happened to be related to those matters. Don't mix this with that. You know, there's a lovely joke about a fellow. Don't mix. You know, there's a lovely joke about a fellow. You know, in America, in the court cases, they have a thing called a jury. You know what a jury is? They call some common people, and the judge, a lot of Jews. And the judge goes through the case, whatever. So basically, there's a group, and it happens to be a very Jewish Yiddish group of a dozen people, and they're sitting in a very serious case, hearing all the pros and cons, and they hear from the defense, and they hear from the prosecution, and the terrible day comes when the verdict comes through, and the poor guy has to sit in the dock, and so the judge says, chairman of the jury, Mr. Goldberg, Mr. Chaim Goldberg, come forward and tell us what the jury has decided. And he comes forward with his Yiddish accent and says, we have deliberated the pros and the cons and the evidence and the people, and we have come to the conclusion as follows. We don't want to mix in. We're not getting involved. We're staying out of this one. That was the conclusion. We're not mixing in. So, hey, Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbanan.
guilty.
Sorry?
That means he's not guilty.
It's not guilty, or he is guilty. They don't want to pronounce
Don't put
either
cod
way.
with the whiskey.
Yeah.
Okay.
They don't want to pronounce either way.
Cool.
Hey, Rabbi Eliezer Rabbanon. Where is there an argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanon, asks the Gemora, which is similar to this argument about the cow and eating the avodah zarah vetches and the what was the other thing in the field with the avodah zarah done? Where is the argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanon? So the Gemara answers, it is an argument with regard to Sa'ir. Sa'ir is actually chametz. Ilaima Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbanon de Sa'ir. It is perhaps the argument between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis about Sa'ir. Now, you know what Sa'ir is. It's very interesting. It's called sourdough. For many years, I didn't understand what it was. And chametz is bread. There we go. This is going to tell us exactly what it is. Sourdough. So the sourdough, as Rabbi Yossi will tell us, is basically the dough is put in a jar and then it starts to react.
It gets sour.
It gets sour. And you have to feed it, you have to add a little bit and take out a little bit.
The day before.
It's a whole process. And this is, by the way, when the Torah says that on Pesach, that's what it means. It means that you shouldn't have that starter, that culture that bakers use to bake sourdough bread. That's called sa'ir. The secret,
keep that.
The secret ingredient.
Keep that.
Yeah.
For each mate.
So
But you keep some of it for the next one.
and you have to and you take some of it to make the next one.
Yeah.
And you discard some of it and put it to
The
side.
customer, why you like sour?
It's not sour, it's delicious.
So now what happened was, what was the argument about this the sourdough is there was a dough. And what happened was the sourdough starter has to go in the dough to cause it lechametz, to leaven, to rise. But what happened was the dough was near two types of sourdough. There was a bit of sourdough that was chulin, which means neutral food that anybody can eat, any Israelites. But there was also a piece of sourdough or amount of sourdough that came from truma. Truma, as we know, is a holy food that only the kohanim are allowed to eat. Us who not kohanim, it's prohibited for us to touch it. It's forbidden. Now, what happened was there was a dough, and the sourdough, some sourdough fell in there from the truma pot, from the truma jar. Some fell in from the neutral, from the chulin jar. Now, neither of them was enough to have done the trick on its own. The two combined and caused the sourdough to rise. What's the story? Is the sourdough bread now truma? Because without the truma, it couldn't have risen. Or is it chulin? That nan we learned in a Mishnah, sa'ir shel chulin v'shel truma, sourdough starter, a little bit of a piece from chulin, and another piece from truma, shenaflu l'seicha iso fell down into the dough. You ever heard about somebody falling into the dough? So here, the sourdough starter of chulin and truma fell into the dough. There wasn't enough of this type to make it rise. There wasn't enough of that type to make it rise.
This is qualified.
When it's tarfu v'chimtzu, but they joined together, and the process called chametz happened because there was enough together. What do? Do you now say it's forbidden to Israelites because there was truma sourdough mixed with other sourdough? So Rabbi Eliezer Omer Rabbi Eliezer said, in that dispute, I go by whatever was last. And the Chachamim say, whether the thing that was prohibited, the truma, fell first, whether it fell at the end, it's not prohibited unless the truma part itself had enough to cause the chametz process. So in other words, Rabbi Eliezer says, by me, the issue is what was the last, what completed the process. If there was already some sa'ir shel chulin, neutral sourdough in, and then the truma came in, then the truma completed the process and the whole thing's forbidden. If the truma fell in first and it couldn't complete the process on its own, then the neutral sourdough fell in after, then it's fine because it didn't do it on its own. And the rabbis say it doesn't matter the order. because as long as the sourdough that is truma is not enough, it's not enough. It can't mess up the whole dough. Now, do you see how over here, where the Gemara's on a discovery through different examples of the Zeva Zegorim. Some of it's truma, some of it's not truma. Not all of the thing that caused the process is prohibited, but some of it is. What do we do? Rabbi Eliezer says we follow the order. The rabbis say we don't follow the order. But Omar Abaye, and on this Abaye commented, Abaye says, I want to clarify that where the rabbis say that it's okay, that there is some sourdough that's truma inside there, is when he pulled it out. It fell in and he pulled it out. So it had an effect, but he didn't leave it behind. He pulled it out. But if he did not pull it out, then it would be prohibited, because even the smallest amount, if it's inside, there would be a problem. And then the Gemora question, the time of the Rabbi Eliezer Abaya, why do we have to explain Rabbi Eliezer like Abaya? The time Rabbi Eliezer mishum the achar naniba. Igemir bi surah surah v'igemir bi atayra mutarin. Vein salke vein la salke. The Gemora rejects Abaya's comment and says it's not relevant whether he pulled out the part that's truma. We don't demand that the person, when they notice that something that's truma fell in, should scoop it out. Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is just simply that he wants to follow the last thing that happened. What precipitated the completion of the process? If it was truma that precipitated the completion of the process, then we'd count it as if truma caused this whole bread to rise. Now only kohanim can eat this bread.
Why isn't it the kohen has to eat the truma? But I mean, I'm just saying that 10%. That's the label in the kohen. But the unsister is, what I'm not understanding is if it's mixed with something else, why then is he not allowed to eat it? Because it makes it tamei.
Weekend. Just going to try and see.
Is any allowed to eat? Truma, the top, because he's the priest.
Sorry, just run it again. I was doing something on the computer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You can only.
Yes.
What's the 160th or so
Yeah.
prior?
You know what I think we'll do? Okay. So, but what we'll do,
Whiskey in
The truma portion is 1/60th of the regular one. Wouldn't that apply as well?
if the truma was what?
1/60th. Like
So not necessarily, because when something has a profound effect, like if it actually causes
So it doesn't look like milk.
yeah, because the difference is the milk in the meat part is bottled is nullified because it didn't do anything.
That wasn't changed.
It doesn't change. But if something changes the flavor and it causes it all to rise, so it has a profound effect on the whole dough. It might be small, but every single part of the dough is changed because of its yeasty effect. Then it's much harder to say bottle. We'll carry on with this next time, gentlemen, and and hopefully we'll complete this sugya next time.
Very good.
Yeah.
I recorded it so I can listen to it again.
Okay.
I'll get a chance.
Well, Les also recorded it. We're done, Les. If you want to switch off the recording.
Still boggles my mind how these guys came up with all these derivatives out of computers. I can say it. I wonder if ChatGPT will give us the same story.